Hello, everyone. Let's talk Congress. Let's talk Congress structures and officers, because this is where we're going to start. Okay, so let's start off. We're going to look at all of these things on the left-hand side. We're going to look at bicameralism, the nature of the membership, the officers of the Congress, and the committees of Congress. Lots of time on congressional committees. We're going to look at what Congress does, the power of the purse, legislation, representation, scrutiny, and of course war. And to a certain extent, we've covered war with the presidency, but we'll come back and look at it again. Once we've done all of that, we'll look at how well Congress does its job. Where does real power lie? And does Congress do its job? And if not, why not? That's what we'll try to determine. Before we get on to that, this is what Congress looks like. Thank you, Wikipedia. We've got two chambers, and right now both have nominal Republican majorities. Now, it's wrong in the states, in the context of the United States, to talk about control, because what we'll soon find out is that no one really controls anything. While we have Republican leaders here, we've got Orrin Hatch as the Speaker pro tempore of the Senate. That's because Joe Biden is, of course, the Vice President, and he doesn't spend a lot of time there. And we've got John Boehner. He's in charge nominally of the House. The idea that these guys can sort of shape the House or Senate and make them dance to their tune is fundamentally misguided for all sorts of reasons, and we will look at those as they come up. One of the other important things to think about when we're looking at Congress is that while the Republicans have a majority here and here, that is by no means given. It's by no means given that both houses will be controlled by the same party, and we can see here that certainly recently there has been a de-alignment of the House and the Senate in terms of party control. This was a peculiar period here. There's 40 years of Democratic hegemony in the House and 26 years of Democratic hegemony in Senate. Atypical, I think, is the way to describe that. And since then it has been, well, pandemonium's too strong a word, but certainly has been a period of unprecedented change or instability, if you will, in terms of the control of in the control of the houses, and that becomes all the more pertinent when we look at this particular line here. This is the presidency, and you can see here that very infrequently will a president have supportive houses, and even if he does, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference in terms of his day-to-day operations for reasons that should bear no repeating here. Anyway, so that's the Senate and the House, and let's have a little more detailed look at the structures. Now, they are very much the same in that they are both equal in legislative authority. There is no equivalent to the Parliament Act. The Senate has no way of bending the House to its will. Similarly, the House has no way of bending the Senate to its will. In fact, the differences are probably more significant. We've got 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate thereby obviously becoming the more exclusive club. Initially, those senators were not directly elected. They were appointed by the state legislatures, but that changed, I can't remember off the top of my head, but certainly a long, long time ago. Constituency. Now, the House seats are allocated by population, so places like Wyoming and Montana, where you've got more cattle than people, they only get the one seat, whereas big states like California, of course the biggest, that gets 52. Two senators, however, from each state. Every single state gets exactly the same level of representation in the Senate. Doesn't matter whether you've got more cows than people, you still get two senators. That's interesting. In terms of qualification, you have to be slightly older to sit in the Senate, and you get a longer term for that. You get 6 years in the Senate, you get 2 years in the House. Now, this becomes really, really important because it means quite clearly that the House is in a state of constant campaign. Every 2 years, it's everybody out and then everybody back in, as often as not. 6 years in the Senate, but at any time, according to the House schedule, when the House goes to election, a third of the Senate stands for re-election at that same time. So here you can say there's a situation of constant campaign, whereas here perhaps you could describe it as ongoing campaign, in that a third of senators at any given time will be seeking re-election from their state. So subtle differences there, and those subtle differences are also evident when we come to look at what they do. Legislation, as we said earlier, both are alike in dignity. Neither can overrule the will of the other. And that's true of scrutiny as well. Both are responsible for scrutinizing executive policy. However, differences abound. First of all financial bills must originate in the House. So anything involving the budget, anything involving spending, has to start in the House of Representatives, spending or indeed taxation. So where the money comes from and where it goes, all of those bills have to start in the House of Representatives. Quid pro quo, I suppose the Senate has a particular advice and consent role, and we know all about this from our work on the presidency. The Senate is required to confirm appointments and to ratify treaties. So you might argue that there's a balance there. It depends really how you look at it. When it comes to impeachment, the situation is subtly different. In this instance, the House decides if a case has to be brought, so the House decides whether or not a president or indeed another senior official of the United States government should be impeached if there's a case for them to answer. So the House decides if a case should be brought. The Senate actually hears the case. The Senate at that point is actually chaired by a Supreme Court justice, because it'd be wrong for the Vice President to step in if he has a vested interest in that particular outcome, and he does, because if the President is impeached, he becomes President. So anyway, that's not really relevant. What is relevant is that the House decides if a case should be brought. The Senate hears the case. So again, subtle differences in the role, but more or less equal, although you would probably say that evidently the balance of power is kind of tipping towards the Senate at this point. And when you add in the terms and age and numbers, we find that it's essentially a pretty clear contest. The Senate has the prestige. People go from the House to the Senate. You don't go from the Senate to the House. So in terms of which House has the greater authority, the greater mystique, then you'd probably have to say that that is the Senate. And perhaps you could take time now to plan exactly how you would answer that question. Just set yourself this little task. I want to see an essay plan. You don't necessarily have to write it. You can do if you like. But do please have a think about that. And then when you've finished, you can just press play again. So press pause now, plan that, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, we're back again, and let's have a quick look at the internal structure, specifically the officers. And we've got speakers, leaders, and whips, and then we've got committees, and we'll look at those separately, and we'll look at parties. Well, we won't really look at these. These are not particularly pertinent to the running of the House. We're going to be much more interested in committees, so interested that I'm going to spin that out in its own separate committee presentation. What I'll just cover here is officers. And again, we come back and look at this in more detail later. But officers of the House of Representatives, we have the Speaker. Now, the Speaker is a partisan position. He is biased. He will come, he indeed, she, will come from one party, and they will exhibit favoritism towards that party. So it is a partisan role. They have various hard powers. They assign bills to committee. They appoint 9/13ths of the Rules Committee. They appoint chairs and members to committees, and they control the timetable. Soft power is this idea of being chief strategist and chief spokesman for the majority party. Those are by and large mirrored in the minority leader, although quite clearly it's a subordinate position. So the Speaker, very, very important position, particularly this one, assigning bills to committees and appointing chairs and members to committees, and of course controlling the timetable. Those are the three big ones. And of course, being the highest profile member of any particular party doesn't do him any harm at all. Now, the Senate is supposed to be the grown-ups. They dislike leadership, and so you can see immediately that there are fewer certainly fewer powers, I suppose, for the Senate leaders, for the majority leader and the minority leader. It's a much more collaborative, collegiate model. Nevertheless, the majority leader in the Senate does have some power. He steers the the selection of committee chairs, and he remains the chief strategist and spokesperson. The minority leader, again, a vastly diminished role relative to the majority leader, but nevertheless, it is not without its perks, and you can see there exactly what it does. There are a couple more officers you need to know about. There's nothing more really in the Senate, but in the House, we've got majority and minority whips, and those of you who've been following House of Cards will know that's where Francis Underwood started his particular march towards power. And then we've got a majority leader, because remember, we've got the Speaker, and then we've got the whip, and then we've got the majority leader. The majority leader in the Senate is third in third in line. And if the speaker, for whatever reason, is forced to resign or loses his seat or whatever, then presumably the majority leader would be the person to step in. And that's about it, really. So those are the structures and the offices of Congress. I look forward to discussing them with you in due course. See you soon.